Woo, Africa on the move. You hear me? This is huge. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso sign the Sahel Security Pact.
Oh,
They literally like, I wish a motherfucker would try to invade Niger. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, three West African Sahel nations ruled by military juntas. I prefer to call them military transitional governments, signed a security pact on Saturday, promising to come to the aid of each other in case of any rebellion or external aggression. The three countries are struggling to contain Islamic insurgents linked to Al Qaeda and Islamic State, and have also seen their relations with neighboring and international partners strained because of the coup. No, the relations were not strained because of the coups. The relations were strained because of France, and they wanted France out. That's why the relation. Okay, the latest coup in Niger drove a further wedge between the three countries and the regional bloc, the Economic Community of West African States, which has threatened to use force to restore constitutional rule in the country. Economic Community of West African States. ECOWAS is an economic formation, and they talk about invading somebody to restore a constitutional status. Mali and Burkina Faso have vowed to come to Niger's aid if it is attacked, and they made that vow before last month when the military transition happened, but they put it on paper now. So it is formal and official. Any attack on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of one or more contracted parties will be considered an aggression against the other parties, according to the charter of the pact. They got a charter and everything, known as the Alliance of Sahel States. It said the other states will assist individually or collectively, including with the use of armed force. I have today signed with the heads of state of Burkina Faso and Niger the Liptako Gourma Charter establishing the Alliance of the Sahel States with the aim of establishing a collective defense and mutual assistance framework. Malian leader Assimi Goita said on his ex social media account all three states were members of the France supported G5 Sahel Alliance joint force with Chad and Mauritania, which was launched in 2017 to tackle Islamic groups in the region, but that formation has collapsed. And of course, relations between France and the three states have soured, not since the coups, but it's never been good because these people have always wanted France the hell out of their countries. And here we are. France has refused to recognize the authority of the military transitional government, but ain't nobody asking for their permission for nothing. So here we are. And I have to add that this part right here, the three countries are struggling to contain Islamic insurgents. That is an oversimplification, if not an outright lie. It's not that the three countries are struggling to contain, Islamic terrorism or whatever you want to call it. It's that terrorism has increased because of the involvement of the US through AFRICOM and through France. Terrorism serves the interests of the neo-colonial powers because it continues to destabilize the government, keeps the people from focusing on being organized, and keeps people's focus off of what the colonizers are still doing, and always have them focused on fighting terrorism. So this idea that these countries are unable to control or contain Islamic terrorism in their countries, and they need France and the U.S. To help them do that. That's garbage. France and the U.S. are the reason that these terrorist groups have proliferated like they have. So this is a big deal in the Sahel.
Yeah. Well, since the fall of Libya, and we're seeing the fallout of that with what's currently happening in Libya, how NATO forces destroy the infrastructure in Libya completely. But that has pushed the insurgents or Islamic terrorists into the Sahel deeper and deeper. And since that time, Islamic terrorism, quote unquote, has spiked at least 500% um, in the region. So when we look, that's always been the assessment when we look at the coups and the formation of the coups and how they're playing out. When we look at the historical basis for why these coups exist, we always have to track back to 2010, 2011, and Libya, and the expansion of AFRICOM since that time, because it has deeply increased the sentiments, the anti-France and anti-U.S. sentiments that have been, impacting and being embedded within in the region. So we look at these countries, and it's significant with these countries because they have a mass base that is growing strongly in anti-imperialism. There are formations on the ground in these nations that, as a mass base, is growing a political line that's pushing these transitional governments in a particular direction. And so when you see this happen, and then you look at the coup recently in Gabon, you can see there's particular distinctions in the way that they're carried out, and that is due to the masses of the people. As Gabon begins to grow, the masses of Gabon and in the region as whole, because we're still looking at Senegal, right? Senegal could pop off at any minute. There's Chad as well. As we look at the growing sentiments in the region of not just anti-France, because they really want to pin it to that, but it is anti-imperialism. Um, it's what
Excuse me.
it is. We see France, particularly because these are Francophone nations, and is so embedded in their nations that is the would be naturally the first target. But it is a growing anti-West, anti-NATO, anti-imperialist sentiment on the ground. So as these masses and these forces begin to strengthen that, you'll see the transitional governments make particular moves. Um, yeah, so that's my take.
So clearly, these nations think that there is a possibility that they could be attacked because they formed this charter saying that if you attack one, the other ones will come to that one's aid. And I know, Jackie, you mentioned earlier that France is not happy, but is France doing any major saber rattling when it comes to the formation of this alliance? Are they indicating that they intend to attack, or would they even indicate, or would they just go in and attempt to do something?
I think, from my estimation, that France is trying to be very careful because they don't want to be seen. That they're fine with being neo-colonizers, but they don't want to be seen being the white people militarily invading an African country. That would be a bad look. They don't want to do that. But they're also like not leaving right now. Like the Nigerians have demanded that the French ambassador leave. He has refused. So they've turned the water off, the power off, and they intercepted a shipment of croissants into the.
Are you serious? Did
No,
they
No,
yeah,
just
serious. Yeah,
haven't.
they really did. They took them croissants. They're like, no croissants for you.
give me them croissants? I'm not gonna give them
No.
goddamn croissants.
So France is not doing overt saber rattling. They're letting African nations, and they're letting ECOWAS and Nigeria do that for them. And the United States, of course, is sitting back, not saying anything,
Mhm.
because they are the United States, I think, is unconcerned about France losing whatever influence they have on the continent, because they're trying very hard to hold on to theirs, the United States is. So the US is hoping, I think, US officials, while they'll say, they're in support of France and, this is undemocratic and blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. The United States is also really not doing a whole lot of the typical saber rattling, because they're hoping that this sentiment among the people in the Sahel is just targeted toward France, and that the US will escape scrutiny. But I can tell you that's not true.
Yeah.
That's the people are for people on the continent, for people in West Africa. France is the immediate everyday kind of symbol of imperialism. But people know that there is somebody behind that curtain. The curtain is thin, and they know it's the U.S. So there's a lot of there's a reason we're hearing about invasion of Niger from African nations and not necessarily from France and the US loudly, because
Right.
the optics are bad. They don't want to be seen being, the white people invading the African nations again,
Again.
although they don't, yeah. So it's a very interesting situation. And like we say, or like we have been saying about these military transitions, which, some imperialism can change, a revolution can happen through a bloodless non-military coup. It can happen democratically. But at this stage in the game, you cannot root these people out through voting folks out. Through it's going to have to be some type of military involvement, and there is a historical precedent for that, especially on the continent. So but these situations are changing. They're changing pretty fast. There's something going on in the Congo. I'm not sure what it is. I have to look into it. Um, there's a lot going on, but I do know that the West is terrified about what's going on in the Sahel right now. They're losing their grip on the Sahel, and they are terrified about it, and that is fantastic for us.
Right. And I think the other point to highlight, I think that is significant, that it is, in fact, the anti-West sentiment that is growing. But what we're seeing specifically about the anti-French serves the U.S. Because while they actually do need France, because France has always played the buffer. Um,
Hmm.
and then the US can come in and say, well, if you don't like France, it's either us or Russia and China. You don't want to do Russia and China. So that's the role that the US is playing right now in terms of how they're positioning themselves. Because Victoria Nuland absolutely did show up in Niger. Um, so they have a stake. They have their base there, their drone base there. They have their CIA base there. They have a stake in what's happening. They do not want to be put off the continent. So it's easier for them to talk about and highlight the anti-French sentiments and the overall anti-West sentiments that have been growing since the start of the proxy war, especially since Gregory Meek's bill for the Russian Malign Act, um, that condemns and sanctions African nations for taking a position or even aligning with or allying with Russia during this proxy war. So as these things are unfolding, and then we look at what's happening with BRICS, and there's a more internationalist sentiment growing, not only with the states, the states, but the masses as well, who I don't think people really recognize or realize how in tune the African masses, especially in the Sahel, are with what's going on in terms of internationally, far more aware than we are here, because it's a stake for them, or they're aware of the stake that they hold in it, as opposed to how aware we may be here. I think there's a level of sort of naiveness, I guess, around how informed we need to be about international issues or what's happening. But the African masses are, especially since it's a growing and expanding youth population. It's majority youth, so they are in tune with what's happening, and you're seeing that unfold with all these shifts. But it is very important to note that these things are unfolding every day, so we don't know which direction it's going to take. But as of right now, this is a net positive that that they would align Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger.
So we know that the United Nations General Assembly is meeting this week in New York. To either of y'all's awareness, has either Macron or Biden been asked or commented about this new alliance in the Sahel? And if they haven't been asked about it, I think that's also kind of telling too. If the whole development has been omitted, I suppose, from mainstream media sources. I don't expect US media to cover this at all, but I know that, there's a lot of foreign press that's in town in New York this week. And I'm just curious to y'all's awareness, has this been brought up to the Western powers for comment?
I don't think it has. I know that Biden spoke yesterday at the UN, and he didn't say anything about it. But I mean, what's he going to say? What's any European leader going to say? They're all members of NATO, which charter says the exact same thing.
Hmm.
I mean, the NATO,
Yeah. I would
you
just be
know,
curious about what he would have to say, considering there were coups, and then they had the lady from Peru was
right,
able to speak. So I
a
would be
coup
curious
leader.
about, yeah, what they would have to say. I haven't heard about anything in particular, but that's a contradiction that they're so concerned about the military coups, but they're in support of the lawfare coup that happened in Peru.
Hmm.
So
Hmm. Bleh, bleh. Does Islamic terrorism create a buffer between the rich and poor in Africa like the black gangs do in the US? I think I'm confused. How do black gangs create a buffer between the rich and the poor in the US? I'm not I don't think I understand that.
And when they describe Islamic terrorism, like what goes for terrorism? I'm just not clear on, I guess, the definition of Islamic terrorism the way it looks on the continent.
right. Well, there are kidnappings and murders and massacres and rape. Those things are happening. But I think the use of Islamic is part and parcel of the overall Islamophobia.
Mhm.
Trying to pin it solely on the religion and not the practice of imperialism and who funds these groups. But so I think while we could note that that is their religion, that is not the driving force. And the
Mhm.
use of Islamic terrorism is to point to that as a driving force and not how the expansion has happened and why they have grown significantly.
Right. And to that question, I think I I I think we're assuming that these groups are the ones that create a buffer between the black bourgeoisie and the black masses. Those groups don't create the buffer. Capitalism creates the buffer.
Hmm.
The black bourgeoisie are, unless, and I say this all the time because Walter Rodney told us about academics, that academics are the enemy of the people unless they prove otherwise. That's the same is true of entertainers, politicians, and the black bourgeoisie. Unless they prove that they are on the side of the people, they align with their class interests. They don't that there are no black gangs that separate the black bourgeoisie from the black masses. That's capitalism and members of the black bourgeoisie um, who support the policies of their class interests and don't care about the masses. Uh, Gangs or whatever you want to call them, they emerge out of the oppression of the masses for poverty, because of poverty, or in the case of Haiti, because the core group, which are a bunch of white European leaders of other countries that are not Haitian, are arming these people to sow the kind of chaos that they need for their narrative that they're using to say that Haiti needs to be invaded. Look at all of these criminal gangs. So it's not that um, in the Sahel, Islamic terrorist groups create a buffer between the bourgeois. No, that's neocolonialism, capitalism, and imperialism propping up comprador leaders on the continent, just like capitalism props up petty bourgeoisie Black folks and Black misleadership politicians and leaders to work against the Black masses in this country.